Dr. Stone, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for giving me the opportunity to share with you some of our results that are part of my PhD thesis under Canterbury Christ Church University. The title of my work is Analysis of the Coptic Music Patterns of St. Basil Liturgy. The word Coptic means Egyptian, and it comes from the Greek word Aegypto. So what we are studying here is the Egyptian music that is used in the Coptic Church, and for example, in St. Basil Liturgy. Why we describe it as Coptic? Because it reflects the very early music used in Egypt in the first few centuries after Christ. Before I talk about St. Basil Liturgy and our study, I would like to share with you some background facts first. The Coptic music has been preserved over the centuries through the oral tradition. We do not have any documentation of the music itself or even notation. We are not unique in the world with this, but as you know, this is how things have been in many countries around the world. Even Gregorian music went through long phases before it was notated in the first part of the 9th and 10th centuries. The second fact is that the composers of the Coptic music are not known. And this probably because of the loss of the documentation we used to have in the Library of Alexandria before it was burned, or the composers themselves were humble enough to try to deny themselves and not to have their names attached to anything documented. We are not sure. Thirdly, the origin of the Coptic music is not known, but speculations took place, suggesting that the Coptic music could be related to some other music around the Mediterranean region, like Turkish music, like Syrian music. And some people went as far as hypothesizing that it could have Pharaonic origin. Although, as you know well, there are centuries and centuries between the Pharaonic era and the start of Christianity in Egypt in the 1st century. Let me share with you a couple of examples of Coptic music recorded by St. Kirill choir that I started in Europe 10 years ago. The first example is shown here, which reflects a festive tune that is used in the Pentecostal time after Easter. The second example comes from the hymns of the Holy Week, the Pascha week, which, as you know, is usually sad in its feeling. Let's share this together. I must mention that the first piece was presented in a competition in Poland between Orthodox churches, and the second one was from a concert performed and presented in Milan in 2016. Now, back to our subject of study. This is St. Basil Liturgy. It is divided into two components. The first one is described as the Liturgy of the Catechumens, which is the first part of the liturgy and has a number of readings in it, ending by the Gospel. The second one is a Liturgy of the Believers, which consists of a number of prayers. Each of them has a specific objective, as we will try to go through them. The two could also be called Liturgy of the Word or Liturgy of the Sacrament, as you can see here. What are the objectives of our analysis? In this paper, we aimed at looking at the patterns of St. Basil Liturgy, particularly the responses, the congregation responses, that are used on a daily basis almost in all Coptic churches around the world. And this analysis is using the Arabic known maqams or scales in English. The second objective was to determine the extent at which the Coptic music is related to the Arabic music, since we will be using the Arabic scales in analyzing it. The question, of course, could be, why we are using the Arabic scales? Because the Coptic music exists in the Mediterranean region, and the Arabic music is the prevailing music in this part of the world. Therefore, it makes sense to use the Arabic scales rather than the Western scales that are quite far from Egypt. The methods we used are summarized here. I recorded the congregation responses of St. Basil Liturgy, and those recordings were carefully notated using the Western notation. Secondly, we decided to divide the liturgy into different sections according to the overwhelming pattern of music in each section, and those sections made 7. The melody that is similar between different hymns in each section was identified, and the melodies that were shared between sections were also identified. Finally, we started looking at maqams or scales that signify each of those sections and studied the potential relationship between those maqams, the sad one, for example, and the joyful one, with the spiritual meaning of each of those sections. Here is the structure of the St. Basil Liturgy. Liturgy of the Word on the left, Liturgy of the Sacrament on the right. There were 3 sections in the first part of the liturgy, and this is the number of the hymns that we recorded and studied. And the respective ones in the Liturgy of the Sacrament are on your right side there. In terms of results, usually the responses in the liturgy in the Coptic Church are led by a cantor or a deacon or a choir, and the congregation join. We do not use instruments. Therefore, how can you start the congregation together, and how can you make sure they all go together in rhythm? That was an attempt that we did in this analysis. I would like to share with you one of the hymns that I taught the choir, particularly the way how it should be sung in a rhythmic pattern, so they know exactly when to start and where to take breath and when to stop. This hymn is sung after the commemoration prayer. The second part of the results is the pitch study. Liturgies in the West are known to start from a specific pitch and to end at a specific pitch. This pattern has never been studied in the Coptic Church. So we tried to identify the best pitch that we can start the liturgy on, and that would lead us through the liturgy until the end without any need for changing the melody significantly. The second point, which was rather important to mention, is that the hymns and the responses in the Coptic Church are joint between all congregation, young and adults and old, ladies and men. We do not have voices, so you need to identify the pitch that is comfortable for most people. And this is what we found. So we start at the E here, and you can see where we end up at the end of the liturgy, which is not too far from it. Here is an example. This is the very first hymn that we studied, Kyrie eleison, and you can see where we are starting here. And this is the final response in the liturgy, and you can see the two are very close to each other to a novice's eye. The third part of our results is rather a summary of what we found and part of what we discussed. The musical patterns of St. Basil Liturgy are structured in a very meticulous way. And although they do not comply literally by the Arabic maqams, they have a touch of each maqam. And this is what makes them difficult, number one, and what makes them unlikely to be Arabic in origin. And we'll come to this later. We succeeded in proposing that the liturgy could be divided into 7 sections, and the music in each section suggests a close relationship between its components, and some pieces are also shared between sections. The third point was that the pitch study, as I showed you, carried us through the liturgy without any problem, and we tested it ourselves in a subgroup of the choir members, boys and girls, and they sang it together with significant comfort without any difficulty at all for a significant length of time. We come to the final point here, which is the relationship between the Coptic music and Arabic music. I alluded to that early on about the use of Arabic scales, but I should repeat again and say that in no piece a full Arabic scale was used, but just either the first half of it or the second half of it. And this, in fact, made at least 3 expert musicians who worked with me in this project rather uncertain as which scale or maqam to describe as the prevailing maqam of this part. Each of them took it in his own way or his own feeling because of the incomplete use of maqams compared to other Arabic music. Now we move to a second part of the study, which is aimed at answering the question whether the Coptic music is related to Pharaonic music or not. And for this, we thought that the best way, in the absence of evidence, is to try to acquire replica of one of the oldest Pharaonic instruments used in Egypt, which is the flute or the bamboo or the nai, the way how it is named in our time now. These are the 6 bamboos or nais that we obtained from Egypt. They were made specially for this study and sent to us in England to try them, according to the description and the numbers that exist in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. The results of this part of the analysis are shown here. The only maqam that could be played on the old replicas, Pharaonic replicas, was the Nahawand as we describe it now. But this does not necessarily mean that the Nahawand maqam existed in those days when the music was first put, because even the description of it, the word Nahawand is not Egyptian word. It's Persian. Second, the instrument itself, the nai, the bamboo, grew at the banks of the river Nile, so therefore the two are not really closely related to each other. The second piece of information was that the prevailing maqam throughout the liturgy for the responses was the Huzam maqam. It does not mean that it is the only one, but it is the commonly found one in this liturgy. Having said that, we are still facing a question, which is, what is the nature of those original maqams on which this music was put? This question remains to be answered. Finally, why you are suggesting that the Nahawand maqam is not that old one that could have been existed in those days? Because the instrument player himself had to struggle in order to produce that maqam which he had in his ears, being a Copt. And it suggests that probably the Coptic music we are talking about now in all times were not exactly of the same structure as it is now. We'll come to this point later. Let us share together a couple of pieces just to show you the difference in the sound between two flutes or two nais. One of them is the oldest one, which is the longest one you can see in front of you here, and this is the musical piece he played, and exactly the same piece he will play it again on the next slide with the modern nai. I hope you noticed that he was moving only two fingers, because this nai, although very long, had only 3 holes in it, compared to the next one. You would have noticed the difference between the two, that the recent nai has at least 6 holes in the front, and you can see how it's giving very rich melody compared to the old one, which reflects very simple early Pharaonic music in those days. The next question was that scale, or the Nahawand scale we are talking about, specific and unique for the Coptic music, or for the Pharaonic instruments in particular, as we tried now? We tried to address this question by trying the same melody and the same piece and hymn using different other old ancient flutes from different civilizations. We have the Irish on the top here, we have the native flute, the American one, Chinese flute here, and the rest of it. And in fact, we succeeded to produce almost the whole piece using these flutes. And this is trying to tell us that probably the piece itself does not tell us about the era that it is Old Pharaonic, but about the ability of those instruments in producing the piece that we sing in our time now, rather than the other way around. The third part of the results section is shown here, as we discussed about the relationship between the Nahawand maqam and the ancient flutes, whether they are Pharaonic or from other cultures. This makes a tight relationship between that scale and the instruments themselves unlikely. In conclusion, I hope I have managed to discuss with you the following. The melodies of St. Basil Liturgy are closely related to the objective of each of the sections of the prayers. So prayer of thanksgiving has a specific melody, consecration and commemoration, and so on. Of course, the time is limited, didn't allow me to go through each of them in detail. Secondly, the available evidence that the liturgical prayers of the first few centuries of Christianity were very simple indeed, and this is very well documented and evidenced, does raise the question whether such complex melodies we have now and we practice now and even we cannot describe musically go that long time back to the 4th and 5th centuries when the liturgy was put together by the disciples of St. Basil. And finally, the sectional structure analysis suggests that rather than original music put at an era and we inherited it, it's probably perpetually developed over time until we received it in our time now. Thank you.